All right, our next guest, you may recognize a few years ago, maybe 5, 6 years ago, he spoke with a group that was here speaking about virtual reality. Big team of people, everybody whip smart. I'd never seen that many left brainers in my entire life. Matt was my favorite person. I made a beeline for him afterwards. I liked his energy, I liked his creativity, I liked the way he thought, and we've become good, dear friends, mostly over eating sushi and drinking mochas at Dilettante in Bellevue. If you know that spot, it sounds so dumb, it is the bomb. And without giving too much away about Matt, because I know he's going to intertwine a lot of his life into today's presentation, which I think is going to be mind-blowing. You know what? I'm just going to leave it there. I find Matt to be a good friend, an insane inspiration. Every time I'm around him, I either need to be better or I'm just going to run back to my little tent in the bush. Matt Chacon, welcome.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for inviting me here to speak with you today. So before we get started, I'm going to ask you all to do one thing. Just give me 90 seconds of your undivided attention and look at these screens. All right, here we go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, America. It doesn't matter where I am shooting in the world. I keep encountering one inescapable reality. The world needs only one thing: more love. So, thank you, Ken, for introducing me. As he said, my name is Matt Chacon, and I am a recovering CEO turned full-time award-winning conflict photographer. And this is my story. Now, I wasn't always a photographer. I actually grew up in poverty in South Central Phoenix, Arizona. And I couldn't afford to go to college. So instead of doing that, I was kind of a nerdy kid. And I helped start a website development company in 1994. And 3.5 years after starting that company, we were lucky enough to have a $63 million IPO. And that allowed me to do two things. Number one, I went from eating a cup of noodles every night to no longer needing to eat a cup of noodles every night. So that was pretty cool. And kickstarted my life as an entrepreneur. And that's what I did for 22 years. I actually helped start up tech companies in Arizona and Seattle. And along the way, I actually went to college when I could afford to pay for it myself. And through many years of going to school, I ended up at Harvard Business School. And there I was, the very image of success. But I gotta tell you, I was about as far from happy as you could get. Something in my life was missing. I just didn't know what. So one day, after a business trip here, see if this clicks through, I walked to the Leica store here in Bellevue, Washington, and I bought this. It's an old school Leica M6 film camera. Little did I know that that simple exchange would completely change the course of my life. What I started to do is document my very lonely life as a never-ending business traveler. And in 2017, I took my camera, didn't know what I was doing, and I went down to photograph the annual May Day riots that happen every year here in Seattle. And I got this photo, and I posted it online. And shortly after that, it became a Leica master shot. And it got published in Leica Photography International. And that did it for me. I was hopelessly addicted to photography. And I realized something by taking all these photos, that I was still running my company. And I realized that even though I'd spent most of my life in white-collar roles, my collar was actually quite blue. And I was way happier out photographing in jeans and a t-shirt than I was building software companies or pitching to venture capitalists. So that's what I did. I started doing the photography that was important to me. And I used my cameras to shine a light on the darkness of social inequality. And I started submitting to photo competitions. And I started winning all of those competitions. And the Leica store said, hey, we want to sponsor you for a gallery show. And I did that, and within an hour of that gallery show, all of my photos sold out. And then shortly after that, I became a photographer with Getty Images. But I was still running my software company. And so that had two very different lives going on. But it wasn't until the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests that I decided, you know what, I think I'm gonna really try to stop juggling and focus my life on photography. And as the nation boiled in civil unrest, a lot of you will remember that Seattle just exploded with people taken to the street to have their voices heard. And my own condo building was nearly destroyed in the city's riots. But instead of seeking a new shelter, I grabbed two of my cameras and I entered the fray. And I started clicking off photos as I moved. And I realized that I was exposing more of myself than I was of anything that I was photographing at the time. So, when protesters captured 6 square blocks of a Seattle neighborhood and renamed it the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest Zone, I thought, I gotta be there. And I captured these photos by spending 24 straight hours photographing in the chop zone. Now, I think a lot of you will remember that were here at the time, that things were pretty crazy in that chop zone. But when I was there, I realized that the people there just wanted to have their voices heard, and they were willing to do whatever it took to have their voices heard. And I was there with my cameras to help tell their story. And so that's what I did. I was happy, and I'd finally found my true calling in life. And I thought, what could go wrong? Then I started to get sick. My body started swelling up randomly a couple times a month. I did not know why, and thought it was allergies. So I went to an allergist, and she said, it's not allergies. So I went through a lot of testing, and it turned out I had a 6.7 millimeter tumor growing in a vein in my groin. And doctor said, if you don't have it removed, it's gonna kill you. And I was like, awesome. Make this huge life change, and this happens to me. So what am I gonna do? So if you're not familiar with how big 6.7 millimeters is, it's about the size of a 1-carat diamond ring. So it's pretty cool if you have it hanging from your finger, right, on a ring, but not so cool if it's growing inside a vein in your body. Needless to say, I had it removed. And that started a whole 13-month journey of treatments, recovery, and just a lot of pain. And I slipped into this very dark place, and I became extremely dark and depressed. And I had a lot of people in my life just disappear, and that didn't feel so good. But I decided, you know what? I can handle this. And so I took my cameras and I documented that 13-month journey. And I decided, I'm gonna let this challenge become my courage. And it didn't really work. It kind of worked. I was still super, super down. And then one evening, two of my very best friends in the world, both of them seated here today, Eric and Kendall, they called me up and they said, Matt, you're dark, you're depressed, we're taking you to dinner. And they took me to this amazing restaurant. And over a truly beautiful meal with a lot of bottles of wine, and some great laughs, and more than a few after dinner cocktails, I was still dark and depressed. And I just couldn't shake this thing. And I remember telling them, I was like, hey, I just made this huge change in my life. And I finally found something that truly makes me happy. And this happens. And I literally said to my friend Eric, why me? And without missing a beat, Eric said, I hate to break it to you, brother, but why not you? You ain't so special. And the thing you need to know about my buddy Eric is that he almost never tells you what you want to hear, but he always tells you what you need to hear. And he said, look, man, no matter what you did or didn't do in your life, this was always going to happen to you. Couldn't avoid it. And I was like, awesome, great advice. And he said, look, think of it this way. What happened to you, what you're going through right now, is your path. And what if this is your only path to your best future? And I was like, I actually thought about those words for a bit, and I was like, what the hell, dude? Here I am pouring my heart out to you, and this is the advice you give me? I was like, well, screw you, man. What do you know? So we finished dinner, and I hopped in my car, and I drove home. I couldn't get his words out of my head. And later that night, I had this epiphany. I was like, holy shit, he's right. Eric's words were like lightning from heaven. What was happening to me wasn't a death sentence. It was a gift. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna focus my entire life on what makes me happy, photography. And that's what I did that night. I said, nothing that isn't photography is gonna be in my life. Oops. And I started submitting the photos. I started taking more photos and submitting them to photo competitions, and I continued to win. And then those photos started getting published, and I started getting some notoriety. And this photo that I captured in the Seattle Chop Zone won a lot of awards and is now in the Smithsonian. So I'm quite proud of that. Thank you. So what I've, since making that decision and since having that kind of frustrating conversation, but very real truth with Eric, he's like a kick to the nards of reality, this guy. That's why I love him. I now take my cameras and I travel to conflict zones all over the world. And I try to tell the stories that are happening in those conflict zones. And these are some of those stories. Now, I've learned something by traveling to these conflict zones all over the world. It doesn't matter if I'm embedded with a team kicking down a door on a drug raid, if I'm embedded with the military in a war zone, or if I'm photographing our latest presidential inauguration or riots and protests here at home. There's something about the circumstances that I've noticed about the human condition. And it's, sometimes you're in front of the camera, sometimes you're behind the camera. But as Eric said, whatever your circumstance, think of it where you are right now in your life. Whatever's happening to you, it might just be your only path to your best future, but you might need a little help getting to that future, and I've been lucky enough to have the help of these friends here. So because I've been able to have this help, and I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by people who elevate me, I'm now a full-time working conflict photographer and documentary photojournalist, and I've sold my condo, I left my company, I embraced my blue collar, and I have adopted a very simple way of life. And these photos represent my growth from CEO to photographer and my current photographic practice. Now, those last two photos that you saw are from a current long-term photography project that I'm working on called Rotary. And what I'm doing is I'm taking my cameras and I'm going to conflict zones all over the world, and I'm taking pictures of children, with their parents' consent, dressed as the occupation of their dreams. And the point of that is to show that not everyone won the lottery of birth. And these kids have something valuable to provide to the world. They just need a little help getting there. But as I've been doing this, something really unexpected started happening to me. I realized that I'm actually now also evolving kind of beyond just a photographer and into more of what I call a visual artist. And what I've been doing is taking my photographs that I've taken in conflict zones all over the world, and I've been embellishing them with graffiti and lyrics from songs by the Beatles. And the reason I'm doing this is to show kind of a social commentary on the absurdity of what we actually value in this modern age. And, you know, we have more people taking more photos than ever before in human history, posting them online. And when we do that, we're training our brains to swipe left, swipe right, click, 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 as we seek out instant gratification, and we're missing the point of the photo that's right in front of us. There's a story there. And what I'm trying to do now is embellish my photos with this street tagging graffiti to force the viewer to stop, focus, and be thoughtful, and really think about the story that's being told on these images. And as I said before, there's one inescapable reality that I encounter over and over again, regardless of where I am in the world. The world needs only one thing: more love. And it's my goal to help inspire that love. And when you leave here today, I'd actually like to ask you something along those lines. Please try to be a force for good. Produce good influence in the world, as I'm sure you all are already, but live your life with an open mind and open heart, and try to embrace a relentless calling to explore the unknown. And I'd also like to say one last thing before I end. I want to say a very sincere and heartfelt thank you to Eric, Kendall, and Ken, seated right here. The three of you, you're warriors. And I've known you a long time. No matter what happens in your lives, you keep moving forward. And I gotta say, you have no idea how much the three of you inspire me. So, thank you. Got any questions?
Making sure it's on. There you go.
Okay, I just wanted to ask oh, stand up, sorry. Bit fancier than I'm used to. So I just wanted to ask, what was the most difficult or hard to see place that you have been in the conflict zones? I just was curious about that.
Very good question. So one of the images that I have here today, it's actually printed outside, and it's a long 16 by 9 on canvas. I put it on the floor. I've seen a lot of pretty ugly things in these conflict zones, and I just get so sick and tired of human beings being ugly to each other. And deliberately, I didn't show anything too graphic. But I will say that one of the worst things I ever saw, outside of the children that are affected by these conflicts, is in Iraq, we walked into a basement. And imagine the worst smell of trash that you've ever smelled, and then multiply that by at least 1,000. Down in this basement was a torture room, and we found bodies half buried in the dirt. And one of the photos that I shared in the very beginning has a long ribbon, an actual ribbon hanging. Someone was tied to that ribbon and tortured to death. And I think about that a lot. Like, what must that person have been thinking as this was happening? And what was going through the mind of the people executing that torture? And then I thought, holy shit, that's a ribbon. Those are made for wrapping presents, not tying up human beings. It's easily one of the worst things I've ever seen.
Matt, quick question. From the Zoom, how do you gain access to the conflict zones? Are you going through NGOs or purely on your own?
Great question. So all of the above. A good way, if you're thinking about getting into conflict photography, is contact whatever your local embassy or whatever embassy of the country you're thinking about going into. There's ways to do that. You can hit me up on my website, Instagram, email. I'm happy to share this with you. I actually teach a class that Eric has also attended on how to become a conflict photographer. I teach 2 classes, and we cover that as well. One of it is a few hours, 3-hour session over Zoom, and the other is a 3-day in-person session where, things get a little spicy.
Question over here.
Thanks so much for sharing your story. How do you choose the next conflict zone? Where are you going to go next?
Great question. The unfortunate reality of that is that you can hop on a plane anywhere on Earth and within 24 hours land in a war zone. You can go in any direction on Earth. A lot of people don't think about that. Which conflict zone? I actually don't really choose them. The news choose them for me. There's this dude over in Russia, egotistical autocrat, who has chosen the next conflict zone for me. So my next conflict zone I'm heading to is Ukraine. I've actually turned down a number of offers to go to Ukraine because I don't want to be just another dude with a camera doing basically street photography in a war zone. I want to tell a good story that actually helps the people there. So my next assignment is with an NGO in late September.
Thank you. Question here.
Thanks again for joining us today. On a positive note, can you think of an example of a moment of empathy that you witnessed in these conflict zones and how that inspired you? And then a follow-on, how do you maintain objectivity, or what's your philosophy about how much you get across the lens? Thank you.
Really, really wonderful questions. Actually, very important questions. So the first question I'll answer is, one thing I have noticed, regardless of the conflict zones that I've gone to, even in America, I mean, we actually have legitimate conflict zones in America. I grew up in one of them. And they're not necessarily war zones, but sometimes they feel like war zones. You see a lot of love. I've noticed a lot of people going out of the way to help each other. And we saw it happen here after 9/11. And unfortunately, that love over time starts to fade away. But the most inspiring, actually, experience I've ever had was actually here in America in the CHOP. And when I was there, actually, 2 people were shot to death while I was in the CHOP. I was there about 15 minutes, and it just exploded into violence. And the reality of conflict photography, it's not all adrenaline. It's mostly days and days and weeks or hours of just extreme boredom. So sitting around waiting for something to happen, and when something happens, it happens like that, and it's usually just a few minutes, and then it goes back to extreme boredom. But when I was in the CHOP zone, a fight ensued. And that photo that I captured was of a medic. He was just riding his bike, probably home from work, and right as that altercation ensued, someone fired 2 shots, this big altercation ensued, the chop exploded into violence. This medic, I saw him ride his bike and try to keep the peace when this conflict started happening. Rode right into it. Right when he got there, someone sprayed the whole crowd, just a random guy sprayed the whole crowd with pepper spray, and the only person that was injured was that medic. He took a direct hit to the face, and he just fell back. He didn't know what was happening, totally disoriented, and a woman, some random woman, just ran over to him, cradled him in her arms, and I captured the whole scene. I have many photos of that. And I just noticed this scene. It was reminiscent of like the seraphic beauty of a Rembrandt painting, if you kind of follow the old masters. She cradled him in her arms, someone gave her a little squeeze bottle of milk, and she started cleaning out his eyes. Easily one of the most beautiful and empathetic moments I've ever seen. 2 strangers coming together, and the people that started the fight, gone. How you stay objective? You don't. Everybody, if anybody tells you, hear a lot from like reporters, I meet a lot of them, oh, I like to maintain my independence and objectivity. The fact that you're there with a camera completely removes your objectivity because of this reason. If you're photographing the conflict in Ukraine right now, and you actually are objective and independent, you're gonna spend 2 weeks in Ukraine, and you're gonna spend 2 weeks in Russia. Nobody's doing that.
Question over here.
I have enjoyed watching you take some of our pictures, and quite often I see you with 2 cameras in your hand, and I'm guessing that you even take some of the pictures we've seen with that. Cameras you can adjust thousands of different ways. What is the mode that you typically shoot in, because you've got to act quickly?
Yeah, great question. The short answer is it depends. The even shorter answer is I really don't care. I meet a lot of, most photographers are not photographers. They're gear nerds. They get, and you know, I really, the reason I have $5,000 cameras with $5,000 lenses is not because I like to spend a lot of money on something I might lose. It's because these are built like tanks. I've literally thrown these out of burning vehicles, jumped out the window, grabbed my camera, started shooting, and actually got photos. So they just work. That's the reason I use Leicas. But the best camera you have is whatever you have in your pocket. I've shot with my iPhone, film cameras, digital cameras of every make and model. When you're in a conflict zone, I've really refined each camera to shoot in the way that I want to capture images. So how I look at these is they're tools. You know, it's like a hammer. You know, you're going to build a house, you need a hammer, you grab the hammer, you don't grab a rock. So the settings vary, but what I tell everybody is forget about the settings. If you want to get action, throw it in auto mode and just spray and pray, and you'll get better.
Matt, I have a quick personal question. You've not talked about your very first business before you got into business. What it is that you did for a living that I have to wonder, if you can talk about it, how what you did, who was like, what the hell did he do? What you did now shows up in the way that you are able to walk through these conflict zones. Will you go there for a second?
Yeah, so I actually forgot to add one of those photos to this, but I'm happy to talk all day about this over a beer sometime with whoever's wanting to do it. But what happened was I was actually in business, graduated high school, couldn't afford college, helped start a software company in 1994. I'll be 50 this year in August. And I was ridiculously liberal, probably the most liberal human being you'd ever meet in your life. I grew up in Arizona, my Spanish are family immigrants, and I grew up around a lot of violence, so I hated guns. And I actually witnessed 9/11 happening, and a switch just flipped in my brain. So after that, I joined the Army, went to sniper school, became a private military contractor, and I did that for kind of off and on for about 8 years. And that actually really trained me on how to stay safe in a conflict zone. It's not hard. I mean, first of all, it's nothing like the movies. You know, I will tell you this, if you're in a conflict zone, vehicles are bullet magnets. They do not stop. They do not stop bullets. It's like, you know, the smallest caliber bullet will go through a vehicle like butter. But I used to do that, and I do have photos, but I didn't put them in the presentation today. But like I said, happy to talk about that over a beer sometime.
I love the fact that you self-described as an award-winning photographer. There's a certain fine line between arrogance and confidence there that I relish. I wonder how many pictures you snap compared to the ones that you choose to submit to be an award-winning photo, and what is the thing that picks the picture for you and says, this is the one?
Good question. I will tell you that when I was in high school, I had this friend, Joy Marlowe. Maybe she's listening today, I don't know. But I was a super nerdy kid, and I had a hard time dating. And I asked her, and she did not. She was beautiful, but we were just buddies. We grew up together. And I asked her, I said, Joy, what do you look for in a guy? And she said, confidence. That's why I describe myself as an award-winning photographer.
Great answer. Last question.
Thank you so much for coming. We respect everything you've said and heard. I do have one question. Love is all important, we know that. But what you don't hear, and what my feeling is these days, we don't know what's the truth and what's not. It doesn't apply to you at all, but it does apply to what's happened to our country.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a question there, but what is having truth? You know, one thing as a documentary photojournalist is there is no such thing as news. It's actually why I continue to remain independent. I've dipped my toe in the agencies here and there, and I stopped doing that because I realized there's not news. There's only narratives. Everyone's pushing a narrative. Why? Because they are beholden to advertisers. What you're watching is a platform to sell ads, just like social media. So the truth remains in here and in here, your head and your heart. It's up to us to kind of filter out the noise and decide what's true. Okay, thank you.